The pursuit of the truth is often met with deceit, but the quest for liberty always discovers the truth. Hi, I'm Jake with InternetDeputy.com, where it's not about politics, it's about freedom. Do not call students girls or ladies in order to help take away the negative stereotypes associated with gender. The Telegraph reported on Tuesday, November 21st, speaking at an all-girls school association conference, or GSA conference, former UK mental health czar Natasha Devon addressed attendees. In a grammatically incorrect sentence, Devon also told teachers, if your narrative is saying girls don't get angry, or boys don't cry, or girls aren't allowed to do this, boys aren't allowed to do this, then that is potentially going to have an impact on your well-being. I believe she was trying to say their well-being. But in the reports of this address, there have been thus far no actual empirical facts to support Ms. Devon's assertions. Essentially, most of what she claims seems to have come from some sort of emotion-based feelings or unproven feminist theory. There's another place it might have come from, but we won't discuss that because I try to keep things clean here. Another indication that her speech is based on feminist claims can be found in her statement on transgenderism. She says, there are some schools that are single-sex schools, but there are transgender students in the year. I don't know what that really means, transgender students in the year. You can't presume that because somebody presents as a gender that that's what they are. The notion that gender is separate from the biological sex of an individual comes almost solely from the ranks of the feminist movement beneath the leftist umbrella. Of course, as in most leftist claims, empirical data is not to be found, and all talking points rely strictly on emotional conjecture. Unfortunately, the academic world in social UK have and will likely continue to embrace such notions. For Natasha Devon, the address at the GSA conference was only one of many that contained unproven leftist rhetoric. In fact, in a YouTube video titled, Is Our Society Breaking Our Children's Brains?, Devon addressed an audience on similar issues as the conference. In this speech, however, she not only spoke of the typical feminist topic of gender, but hit several general leftist talking points. Many in the intellectual class and the unlearned in general might praise her for this video, but to those people who subscribe to facts-based information, Devon revealed major flaws in her thinking. At one point, she blames rising inflation on stress levels of young adults who are forced to live with their parents as a result.
And when I was born in 1981, my dad had a market stall and my mum was an assistant buyer for a fashion chain. And neither of those are particularly well-paid jobs, but they could afford a mortgage on a modest property, they could afford to run a car, and they could afford to feed and clothe me. That would no longer be true in 2016 because wages have not kept up with inflation. And that's left a lot of young people feeling that they don't have a sense of purpose, because that's why you go out and work. It's to gain your independence. We live in a world where people are living with their parents into their 20s and 30s.
But then applauds the idea of social justice, which of course contributes to inflation on the highest level.
They'll call me a social justice warrior. I still can't work out why that's an insult, by the way. Social, good word. Justice, brilliant word. Warrior, okay. How did that end up an insult? Anyway.
I had to mention that. Now, I realize that the inflation issue has nothing to do with this actual report. However, it does demonstrate a valuable point. There are several contradictions within leftist thinking, and this is one of them. You're going to say that inflation is causing young people a lot of stress, and being social justice warriors is a wonderful thing. The problem is that whole social justice notion, which is rooted in socialism, communism, whatever, necessarily in trying to achieve it actually causes the rise of inflation. I mean, you cannot steal from one group of people to give to another group of people without it having an effect on the economy. Businesses who are overtaxed will pass on the tax burden to the consumers. Hello, inflation. Anyway, it goes to prove a point. These people are idiots, they have contradictions in their thinking, and they make no sense, and they continue rattling on like they do. This statement that Natasha Devon made at the GSA conference created some controversy as they were reported in the media. In trying to defend her talking points, Devon took to UK's This Morning program. She made off-context point that she was only suggesting that children not be called by their gender to the head teachers rather than instructing them to do so.
Now, my job is I'm a campaigner and I'm supposed to provoke debate and discussion. And sometimes that involves saying things which are considered to be controversial. But what the papers have done, I think, is they have predicated their argument on a number of fundamental misunderstandings about what happened. First of all, the way it's written, it's like all these hundreds of head teachers were sat there waiting for me to come in and tell them what to do. That's not what the conference was. It was head teachers who came together to discuss ideas on best practice. And I talked about gender in the context of an hour-long speech.
Who cares? But according to her, they're all just putting their heads together. They're all just trying to find out better ways to take care of the students, something they really don't care about. What they want to do is brainwash the students. What they want to do is cram their rhetoric and their garbage in the students' heads. ADD interjection. I'm going to try to understand Natasha Devon by playing Natasha Devon. Do you like my pet? It's such a beautiful pet, now isn't it? No, I never said he was a turtle. How dare you? How dare you interject societal pressures and stereotypes on my pet? He is a dog. He thinks he's a dog. He is a nice little doggy. Do not call my pet a turtle. I don't care if it's a female turtle. It is a male dog because that is what he thinks he is. You racist, homophobe bigot. You have no idea how hard our social justice warriors work to make sure my poor little doggy gets treated with fairness. So concludes my debut in acting, which I might add, adds more stress to them. They won't acknowledge that, though. She then doubled down on the real controversy by making it several troubling statements regarding the issue. She ignored a question from one of the hosts regarding political correctness backlash.
No greater advocates of diversity than Holly and myself, and understanding and compassion. But we have to put the other side of the discussion. Yeah. What happens if a teacher makes a mistake? So if one of those, so this then becomes part of the school vocabulary. Yeah. You know, a teacher has been working for 30 years in school, have a very specific way that they teach the pupils, and they make that mistake. And these are the circumstances that then we read online and then we read in the papers that someone gets absolutely trounced because they called someone girls.
Right. All we're asking people to do is their best. And in my experience, most parents and most teachers are doing their best. But what they also want are new things to try because their children, in a lot of instances, are struggling.
Instead, she answered by saying what they want. And when she says they, she's talking about academia and parents. She's assuming what parents want. Is for people to try new things because their children, in a lot of instances, are struggling. It is important to note that she gave no actual data as to the definition of struggling, how many are struggling, and what they are struggling with. As usual, leftist thinkers often revert to referring to people in the abstract rather than actual individuals. The former mental health czar was asked another question about how a person just out of school might take being addressed by gender in the workplace environment when unaccustomed to this, since these rules thus far only apply to academic institutions.
If we're doing it in schools using this language, if we're doing that, surely then we should be doing this in adults in the workplace. Otherwise, what you're doing is creating an unrealistic future for these kids, because they'll come out of school and they'll be like, hang on a minute, somebody's using a pronoun that is feminine. Well, I'm shocked and outraged by that. But actually, the rest of the workplace doesn't do that because we don't. So when does it start? I mean, does it start when you give birth and somebody says, oh, it's a baby, because I can't say boy or girl because, you know, we don't want to put anything, we don't want to offend anybody, we don't know yet this baby might transition at some point. Where does it start, where does it end, or is it just something now that we have to have everywhere?
Okay, so everybody's feeling in the dark on this because this is a relatively new thing. This is a spotlight that's being shone on an issue that's been kind of underground for a very long time. But here's my idea.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people like Robert Webb, for example, like Caitlin Moran, who are doing some fantastic work at trying to redefine what it means to be a boy and what it means to be a girl and to make it more broad and inclusive.
Devon once again skirted the question by claiming that this is a new development that has been underground for a very long time, and then decided to mention two people in academia who are working on ways to redefine what it is to be male and female.
ADD moment. When she says redefine male and female and what they are, I'm a little worried. Does this mean my penis will change? I mean, am I going to be forced to go have an operation where a little mini vagina is put on the end of it or something? I'm just wondering, what does it mean to redefine and kind of make everything mixed together? Just wondering.
Now, before we talk about the redefinition of male and female, let's notice how she never said, how do we handle it? She never responded to the question. The question was, how do these young people handle your garbage when they get out in the real world? No, instead, we're going to redefine what it is to be male and female. And while Devon sounds like a positive intellectual person, the underlying issue is how she and the feminist community will decide to force public compliance. In other words, she doesn't foresee this to be a problem because even work institutions, all institutions, will be forced into this nonsense. It is most certain that there are more and more political correctness will ensue, and more leftist media and outlets will be complicit in the process. As usual, more freedom and liberty will be lost in those societies like the UK who allow PC thought police to silence the masses. Overall, the claims by feminists like Natasha Devon are rooted in completely unfounded statements based on unfounded problems. They say, sex is between the legs and gender is between the ears.
Sex lives between your legs, gender lives between your ears.
They also insist that there is a huge epidemic of young people who are adversely affected by what amounts to pronouns. In June of 2014, former head psychiatrist of Johns Hopkins Medical Center, Dr. Paul McHugh, released an article in the Wall Street Journal warning against sex reassignment surgery in place of addressing the psychological disorder of gender dysphoria. This and other articles by him have been lambasted by the media and by LGBT and feminist extremists in the medical field. Essentially, these extremists are exacerbating the issue by refusing to acknowledge a mental disorder which accounts for disproportionate rates of attempted suicide. It is important to them to push a fake social issue instead of treating a very real disorder. This doctor, Paul McHugh, actually was in the business of gender, was in the business of gender reassignment. And he decided after the many years, this man's 85 years old, he is no newcomer to this. And he decided that they were making a huge mistake by not treating the mental disorder. You know, he even says on his own in other interviews that he's not out to teach people or to tell people how to live, what to dress in, or how to act. But he is saying before they go start, you know, cutting off penises, they should be very careful to deal with the mental disorder. The irony behind the LGBT rhetoric is that they claim to be compassionate for those who want transition, but that the passion disappears when it comes to treating a bona fide mental illness. An article in thestranger.com even documents the pressure that transgendered people often receive from the feminist and LGBT community when they decide to go back to their original birth gender. In other words, if transgender people decide that they are no longer transgendered, they are shunned and even mistreated much in the same way that conservative blacks are considered not black by leftists, right? The whole notion that there is a real problem with mass amounts of students who feel adverse effects of being addressed by their gender pronoun is preposterous. It is obvious that pseudo-intellectuals in academia have created an issue that was not an issue before and have tried to portray it as an out-of-control problem. This false scenario is not the first of its kind in academia and leftist circles in general. Just, as kind of a sidebar, it will become a problem with these students because they're going to keep having this crap poured into their brain, and eventually they're going to think that they should be upset when somebody calls them a male if they happen to be a male, or a female if they happen to be a female. In fact, this is only recent in a long line of false narratives presented by the left in order to evoke the need for more government involvement in the lives of everyday citizens. Famous economist and author Dr. Thomas Sowell, who is also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, pointed this out regarding sex education. In 1960, sex education was proposed to take place in school systems in order to combat rising pregnancy and STD rates among teens. The proposal was based on a false issue, as both teen pregnancy rates and STDs had actually been on the decline in the previous decade, leading to the proposal. It's also worthy to note that the sexual issues, these sexually transmitted diseases, teen pregnancies, were on the incline after the subsequent sex education being placed in the classrooms. But while the false narrative of the day portrays that students all have feelings of repression due to being addressed as a pronoun, there is a very important yet forgotten element in this story: the parents. As reported by InternetDeputy.com in May of this year, the teaching profession seems to act autonomously without regard to parental wishes. They'll tell the parents they care. They'll tell the parents they want to work with them. In reality, they want to cram garbage in their throat. The UK especially, we know, there in the article that we put out in InternetDeputy.com, where UK teachers were fighting for the ability to teach LBGT standards to toddlers. Think about that, to toddlers. Why does it even matter to toddlers? They're trying to get to these kids earlier, and they're trying to ruin them. That's exactly what they're trying to do. Parents carry no sway among pseudo-intellectuals who wish to create new problems for their children. They are sometimes mentioned, and when they are most certainly referred to, as in the student's case, in the abstract. Natasha Devon, the GSA, academia in general, and the media all follow suit. Add to it the UK government's willingness to usurp parental rights, as we saw in Charlie Gard case from earlier this year. Teaching professionals have little reason to worry what parents actually think. Aside from Devon herself alleging that parents are sometimes helpful in eradicating the gender address, little has been mentioned as to how parents overall feel about this topic. Indeed, the very idea likely conflicts with the values that at least some of these parents are trying to instill in their children. Now, she may have had two that she knows of. Two parents that are likely feminists, who are grateful they didn't have men, or have little boys, but have females, and they're not allowing their females to be called females, right? They're probably feminist parents. Other than that, the rest of the population is not mentioned here. For all we know, none of the parents really subscribe to this idea. Yet all of a sudden, the feminist movement has decided there's a rampant problem, regardless of the lack of real evidence. Over millennia, there has never been an indication for the need to eradicate the address of people by gender. There has never been a single shred of evidence that points out the need for such an endeavor. Yet, all of a sudden, the feminist movement has decided that there is a rampant problem regardless of the lack of real evidence. When evaluating claims from people like Devon, it is worthy to note that the underlying belief system involved. Devon, while being a feminist, is also part of a larger leftist ideology. Since nothing in leftist thinking is rooted in real science, it can be assumed that she believes that the common ordinary citizen in a free society is simply not intelligent enough to decide what is best for him or her, and should rely on pseudo-intellectuals as herself for living standards. And while she may try to sound positive and inviting of different points of view, the end result of what she proposes necessarily requires for there to be less personal choice and absolutely no freedom to speak out when the fallacy has been identified or debunked. Devon herself was terminated from her position as the UK's mental health czar for making outrageous statements. But with more power being given to feminists and leftists in general, it is only a matter of time that more like her will take power. This forceful way of thinking will increase to the point that government will indeed be able to force any ideology onto its citizens. Currently, the political correctness is the tool that the UK and Canada and the US and France and many others use to control language. But in the foreseeable future, PC will likely give way to legislation whereby it will be a crime to debunk any feminist or leftist myth. We see that now when we see in different societies their masses and certain people within their masses calling for the regulation of quote-unquote hate speech. See, speech is speech. Hate speech, the minute you legislate hate speech, you get to decide what hate is. And when you get to decide what hate is, you get to quash all of your political opponents. And you get to enslave the population. You get to control language. All of this nonsense is newspeak. When you consider 1984 and how they were eradicating words in the English language, you were not allowed to say amazing. You were not allowed to say awesome, stupendous, wonderful, one of a kind, grade A, Olympic class. You weren't allowed to say any of that. You weren't allowed to say bad, horrendous, horrible, horrifying. You weren't allowed to say any of that. Instead, it was either, in fact, you weren't even allowed to say bad, right? You were only allowed to say good or ungood. And if it was super awesome, you couldn't say super awesome. You had to say triple good or triple ungood if it was horrible, right? By eradicating language, you eradicate thought. That's the general thinking. And political correctness is nothing more than language control. People should be alarmed every time they see another act of political correctness. They should be alarmed, they should be worried, they should be offended. Because this is not an attempt to make things fair for people. This is not an attempt to make everybody nice to everybody else. This is an attempt to use those ideas in order to shut you up because you disagree with them. And at one point, some of these people who think that political correctness is good will also be affected. And by that time, it'll be too late. Anyway, I'm Jake Fogg. I'm with InternetDeputy.com. Please subscribe to our channel. We have plenty of good information to share with you. God bless and good night.